Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The efforts to support minority business in Memphis, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Joanne Massey. She's director of the Office of Business Diversity and Compliance for the City of Memphis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Daryl Cobbins runs his own commercial real estate firm and is also an advocate for these issues. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So, Joanne, you started in February. We've tried to have you on a couple times, but obviously this is an ongoing issue. We did a show, I think, in around February, right when you had started on some of these issues. But what have you, let's start with what have you learned being at the city for 6 months, what the city was trying to do right in terms of increasing minority contracting and the disparity that we all know. What was the city doing right and what was it doing wrong?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, but I will say that some of the efforts that we have had in the past have missed the mark, but they've had really good intentions. And so it's now a matter of bringing together those intentions, the will of this administration and the community, and the resources. And that's really what's always been missing, is the additional resources. Our staff went from 3 people in contract compliance to we now have a staff of 7 full-time people and 2 part-time people. So the manpower, along with the data from our disparity study, and then the software, we have a system called B2G Now that allows us to have a more complete, comprehensive picture of what we're doing in city contracting, and then how we're spending with minority and women-owned businesses.
Did you find a resistance to contracting with minority and women-owned businesses, or was it more of a kind of passive choice not to do so? I mean, you know what I'm trying to get at? I mean, why was that? And what was the number? What is the number now in terms of the percentage that goes to minority and women-owned businesses? And what causes that to be so low?
So the number has, as of 2015, June 2015, it was about 11%. So since then, we've increased, and this is as of August of 2016, we're at about 14%. Right. So given those numbers, that's about a 17% increase over the time. By no means, I wasn't there, so I can't say, you know, who, why, and what. But based on my observation and my assessment, it was definitely not because people didn't want to.
Right.
It's a matter of having a strategic strategy with all resources aligned, right, and everybody on one page. And that's what Mayor Strickland has been able to do. His mandate is to city government and to everyone on staff that we all are responsible for increasing these numbers. So it definitely wasn't they didn't want to. It was just a matter of how, and having one consolidated office where people could go to ask questions, get resources, and providing them information, yeah, sure, and access to the vendors.
So Daryl, we'll come back to some of those things, but we'll get Daryl. You've been an advocate for these issues, you've been involved in it, you're on the show talking about these kinds of things before. What do you see a difference now? And there's kind of 2 parts to this. One is the amount of money that's going to the city, in the contract, or from the city to minority and women-owned businesses, so the contracting. But there's also, I mean, a lot of conversation, you and I have talked about it, been in forums where it's talked about, of just private businesses making choices about who they contract with and so on. So do you see things changing? Because again, you've been following this stuff and advocating for this for a long time.
Right. Yeah, I do see movement. But as I've said before, I think what we need is momentum. And so when you look at government, both city and county, you see they've both done disparity studies. You see they both have established task forces to develop strategies that can provide long-term outcomes that get us where we want to be. What I'm looking for really is sort of the private sector equivalent of that. And you know, there have been efforts at the chamber, and the chairman's circle is putting forth some efforts. But I think what we have to have is sort of a locking of arms across both public and private sectors to move the needle.
A lot of the time too, and Carolyn Hardy, who couldn't be here for scheduling, but the current president of the Memphis Chamber, African American woman with an amazing story and amazing business experience. It's talked about. Some of it is hurdles, some of it's choices. I mean, there's a whole series of issues that come together for private businesses of why they may not, they're comfortable with the contractors or the subcontractors they have. I mean, how do you? And then we'll go to Bill, but how do you kind of push that and get people to think differently is sometimes really the starting point.
Well, I think you have to have some examples, and a couple of the efforts that are underway through the chamber I think are beneficial. Where there's a mentor protege program where you have to have an opportunity for relationships to be developed. People do business with people who they know and like and have confidence in, and we have to foster that in some cases. The other aspect of this, though, I think is just in terms of looking at the Memphis economy historically and understanding that there are economic disparities that exist. And as a community, we've done an admirable job thus far of looking at workforce development through GMAC and other efforts to help people become skilled and equipped to participate in the economy. On the flip side of that, and thinking more in terms of equity and having a stake, I think we have to place some level of priority on the business ownership and entrepreneurship opportunity to the point where you get to actual wealth creation as opposed to just simply income.
Yeah. Bill.
Joanne, as we tape this program in the last week, your office, the administration, have announced some action around the percentages, which for people who don't know, when everybody gets around the table at City Hall and starts talking about this issue, the issue is what's the percentage on this contract? What was the goal and where is the actual percentage on it? So tell me what this new step is that's been announced in the last week on that.
So the new step is not something that's actually brand new, but something that we are committed to applying to all projects where we can. And so what it is, it's participation goals. And on each project, we're going to be setting going forward separate goals for minority businesses and for women businesses. Historically, for the majority of the projects, and especially in the last few years, it's been just a combined goal. So for example, if you set a 31% goal, then the prime contractors who are utilizing subcontractors through the MWBE program can do any combination of minority and women businesses to meet that goal. What we're doing and what we're able to do through our disparity study results is to actually look at the availability in our community and the utilization and set separate goals for minorities. We know that the majority of the businesses in our community and even on our MWBE certified and registered list are minority companies. There are some women-owned companies, and it's a percentage of. And so in being fair, we're going to be setting goals based on that percentage of minority businesses that are qualified, willing, and able to do the business, and then a goal for women businesses. And we think that will allow us to target opportunities more to those groups that are disadvantaged in city contracting, and also allow us to really meet the number one goal of addressing the disparities that we have in contracting.
Right.
I think that's an important point because you guys at the Daily News have written about it. It was written about in other publications recently about the IKEA project, and where the outcome was that there was no African American firms received contracts on that signature project that we actually made an exception for through the EDGE pilot process to create the avenue for a retailer. And so the points that Joanna is making, where you segment out goals based on minority, woman, or African American, whichever the case may be, I think we have to get down to that granular level to ensure that the outcomes that we want to see occur in the places that we think they should.
Because by the broad MWBE category, IKEA met the goals, but it it was by the numbers, by the rules that existed at that particular time.
And in the community, 63% African American for no African American firms to participate.
But there were
I think.
women-owned businesses that were hitting, where that's how they hit their goal, basically? I mean, not that anyone, I don't know, there was something something bad going on or intentionally bad going on, but that's how it came
Right, but it's very important to clarify that this practice that we're implementing is on city contracting. So we're wanting to set the example, and that's what we're doing here, period, in this administration. We want to set an example for all of our boards and commissions, agencies, and the private sector. So this change does not mean that EDGE will go to that granular level, as Daryl indicated, but it does mean that we're showing how it can be done. And again, like I talk about all the time with my team about best practices.
Well, EDGE derives its power from city government, so hopefully we can see
but,
that
but
occur.
that's an important clarification.
sure.
Now, EDGE they changed their guidelines for minority participation for companies that do get pilots. Were you happy with the direction they took on that, or are you familiar enough with it to say?
I'm generally familiar with it and followed it, and I'm pleased in the sense that there were some who were making the argument that there should not be a diversity policy at all. We should just keep it open and hope that things work out.
And then there was another extreme, not to interrupt, but another extreme of people who said there need to be hard requirements, period, end of story, and if you don't get that, we're going to claw back. The clawback, which the site consultant people and the economic development people say, well, no one's going to come. So it'll just kill it because they're not going to take that risk. And so you were happy generally.
I think the outcome was sort of a middle ground compromise.
Right, exactly. It was a middle ground where the good faith effort was what was always measured. And so now they're actually looking at those hard percentage goals and ensuring that those are met on the project.
And they also, and I won't name the company because I don't have the facts in front of me, but EDGE, Reed Dulberger, announced they're going to potentially claw back on a pilot that was done, a kind of a smaller, less prominent one, and the company just was unaware that that requirement was in there, and it sounded like, in the way we wrote the story, that it was just a massive misunderstanding. Now, maybe who knows what, but that's a first, I think, for EDGE just to threaten to go back and say, look, you got a pilot, you got big tax relief, and you didn't do anything about it. It's on our website, so I don't want to name the company.
Well, and it's a big, to me, that type of effort and what we're doing is a big example of intentionality. It's all about being intentional. It's all about, being strategic and focused on helping minority and women businesses grow, but also in how we are targeting opportunities and doing spending with those businesses.
Because when this goes to the city council, when you say we hit this, here was the goal in terms of the percentage, here's what we actually did on this particular project for MWBEs, the first question from probably several council members is going to be, okay, what was the percentage of black-owned businesses? What was the percentage of women-owned businesses? So the discussion's been going there. It just took a few steps before to get there.
Right, and we've always been providing that information. But again, like I said, this opportunity on the projects, and just as an example, if you have 27 minority companies, understanding that minorities make up in how it's designated with the federal government, African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanics, and Asian Americans. That's the minority group. You have 27 minority companies and 4 white women businesses. How are we looking at being fair and creating equity and providing opportunities if we don't separate the goals? How could we possibly say it's fair if that 31% that I talked about is met by total, just by women-owned businesses? That's not really fair, and that's not addressing the disparities, and that's what we're trying to do with separating these goals.
Daryl, did you have a point?
Well, I was just going to say that I think that it's important to sort of place this entire conversation in context, both locally and nationally. From a local standpoint, minorities make up roughly 70% of the Memphis population, and if those folks aren't succeeding, then Memphis really isn't succeeding. But in a macro sense, cities across the country are having these exact same conversations about economic inclusion. I'm involved with the group through the Annie E. Casey Foundation. I know the National League of Cities and Memphis is participating in an effort with other cities to look at the economic inclusion strategies. And so, in the national media, when you hear this term income inequality, which I tend to talk about, sort of the income gap, because I don't think incomes will ever be equal, but it's a national phenomenon, and when you boil it down to the local level, economic inclusion is really a big piece of that, and minority and women-owned business development is one component of what should be a larger group of strategies.
This is pretty complex in pursuing what seem like simple, basic goals here, but you have to also certify that a minority-owned business is in fact a minority-owned business. And there's been a lot of discussion about the certification process. So where is the process of looking at that and possible changes to that to make it do what it's supposed to do, but also make it a bit easier?
So just a couple of months ago, I was in Chicago, and I was in a group of about 500 of my peers who do this type of work that I do in diversity and compliance. And everyone in the room, the majority of the people in the room, agreed that some type of certification process was necessary. Otherwise, you open the door for potential fraud and fronts, and we have to know that companies are who they say they are. It's not, it's not science. But in the same token, we want to make it easier for minority and women-owned businesses to do business, especially with government, and we don't want to create undue barriers. So right now, for us, we are looking at the process. We are looking at those agencies that we have partnered with in the past and trying to create a different system and a change in how certification is done. We also, and I'm very happy that our city council was able to see and understand the importance of reciprocal certification. So now Shelby County's locally owned small business certification that they already do and they've done for many years, we will be able to accept that. Their EOC office verifies race and gender, and we will accept that because it is government, right? Mm-hmm. You sign an affidavit to say who you are. So if there's any fraud, they'll sign an affidavit on our side and on the county side already. We'll accept that, and they'll be able to be certified as a small business enterprise through our list.
Because I was at a thing where some general contractors were talking more on the private sector side, but that the percentage of minority businesses was questioned. They said, well, in a couple cases, and they weren't saying there wasn't a problem, so I don't want to frame this incorrectly, but that in a number of instances there were minority-owned businesses who weren't certified and so weren't counted against that percentage because the certification process, this is on the private sector side, was just too complicated. They just say, I got to get to work. I can't spend all this time. So that's partly what you're talking about on the city, the governmental side, that it used to be if you were going to do work with the county, you had to get one certification, the city a different certification. Is the schools a whole other certification? I mean, they're just too many hoops is what people will say.
Right, exactly. And so again, as I said earlier, we're trying to lead the way with best practices. This is a system, we've been here now, Mayor Strickland's been in office since January. I came a couple of months after. So this wasn't all created overnight, this structure that is a barrier, and it won't be fixed overnight, but we're working on that. It is very important to note too, though, we're not satisfied with these numbers, but of the non-certified minority spend that we've had in the past, it's been even higher. So there are firms, as you said, Eric, that won't go through the certification process, but you look at me, you look at, Dara, we know who we are, we know our race, and you can see it clearly. That's how we're working with business owners. We can see it, but it needs to be documented properly on paper in order for us to actually count it. And that's the important part. So whoever comes up with a system and an open portal and all those things, those are just things that we really have to look at very closely.
I want to shift a little bit back to something Daryl was talking about with entrepreneurship and ownership and equity and wealth creation. Your office, you're working with StartCo on it starts next week, right? Talk a little bit about the Propel program, because this is very interesting and different than what I think we've heard in the past and some of the efforts coming out of
Absolutely,
your office.
absolutely. And it goes back to that dedication of resources. So with Starco, we've seen the successes that they've had in general in the community with helping startup businesses and small businesses grow. And so we approached them about creating a minority business accelerator. And I'm going to repeat that because it is a minority business accelerator. We have other accelerators in our offices that are more open to everyone,
general small business
to general small
accelerators. Yeah.
businesses. Right. Exactly. So this isn't excluding anyone. This is just one that is targeted to minorities. This accelerator will basically help businesses to grow their capacity and refine their pitch and approach to customers. It's going to cultivate, it's going to be a combination first of what Starco provides in helping, helping their businesses build their customer base, identify their customer, develop
Refine
their pitch.
Their business plan.
Exactly.
We've had some of their folks on here before.
Yeah, exactly. And then for us on our side, we're going to be coming in and working with them. We're going to be having the Black Business Association folks. Roby Williams is going to be working with us and some of the other partners on city contracting, how to do business with the city, how to fill out the bids, what's needed. So that combination is going to end, and we're very excited that we've already gotten some private sector partners to agree to have what we're going to call a pitch day. So like Starco has had their demo day, we're going to have some private sector folks. The Chamber is on board, Carolyn Hardy, International Paper has agreed, FedEx has agreed, and they're going to all come together to hear those businesses give their pitch. How often are minority businesses, when we talk about opportunities and that networking, how often are minority businesses able to be in a room full of potential customers, having had this, this practice on their pitch and being able to give it? It's amazing.
And I'm glad you said it that way too, because it's not just to help people contract potentially with the city or the county. This is to contract with FedEx, to contract with any business here or around. Okay.
Exactly. So the other side of our office, and we have two units. We have the business services and contract compliance. Business services, which was derived from what MORE was, Memphis Office of Resources and Enterprises, is about helping businesses build their capacity, helping them go from being subcontractors to actual prime, and helping them identify private sector opportunities.
Right. And Bill, we got about 4 minutes left.
All right. Daryl, a couple of years ago, you and Ron Redwing and a number of business and political leaders kicked off this renewed effort at the National Civil Rights Museum. In that time, how would you measure the progress that's been made on business to business participation in particular?
Again, I would say that there's movement, but we need momentum. I think the Chamber has stepped up in a major way, and over probably the past year and a half, had a task force established that is coming forth with a number of different strategies and steps to address that on the B2B side. But there are other organizations in town that wield a lot of influence and power, like Memphis Tomorrow and others, who, if they come alongside the Chamber and the Chairman's Circle and other groups, I think we can make some real progress.
How important for a Black-owned business is having a government contract as a step to a business-to-business contract?
It's huge. I have a very close friend, I won't mention his name, but 5 years ago, it was him and one other employee. He's had a series of smaller government contracts and had the opportunity to get one large one, and has gone from 2 employees to 30 employees in about 5 years. And that to me is sort of a prime example of, you hear a lot about capacity, and I think capacity can be garnered through examples like that. If you have 2 people, you can't do a whole lot. But when you can build up your experience and your track record and expertise and garner larger contracts, you're able to grow your capacity.
Right. Because sometimes the thought is that these are 2 separate realms and they both actually feed each other.
And that's why Mayor Strickland merged our office, and that's why programs like our Shelter Market Program, the SBE, where only small businesses are competing against other small businesses, is important. I agree with Daryl that the Equal Business Opportunity Programs are meant to help businesses grow capacity so that they can take on larger opportunities in the private sector.
That's right.
Well, again, I'll go back to contracting and some of the big general contractors. A thing I was at, they were talking about a mentorship program, so that they, have worked together to try and build small contracting, in the various, whether it's electricians or it's masonry or whatever. Those kinds of things, how important are those? And do you work with businesses and specific industries to try and encourage them? Because you can only do so much. Government can only do so much, but it does take that sort of mentoring and connections and networking. So again, there's one example of the general contractors in the city who do some sort of program like that. Are you trying to encourage other businesses to do that kind of thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a program that's, we call it our Lunch and Learn series, and it's a Sub Meets Prime. We've already had Montgomery Martin to step up to the plate. He was actually our first Sub Meets Prime company that actually did a lunch and learn with subcontractors who were interested in doing business with him, and he spent 2 hours just talking about the opportunities he has. And so we're doing those. The companies, it doesn't cost any taxpayer money. The companies pay for the lunch. We provide the facilities. I'm there. We're doing those types of things. We're also encouraging joint ventures. And in addition to that, through the participation goals, it's not just working with the minority and women-owned businesses, the small businesses, but the actual prime and the contractors. We're helping to educate them on how to do this as well.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Bill. Just a reminder, early voting has started. I voted yesterday, this week. We'll cover the election next week, kind of some of the things that are on the ballot. So tune in next week. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.